So we have the great Halle Berry looking good at 57 years old. And she said, "It's been 20 years since I had the honor of bringing this iconic character to life. Thank you to all the fans who have embraced Catwoman, even if it was a little delayed. Patience Phillips is finally getting her due. Meow." So, Halle Berry, it's been 20 years since Catwoman came out. And I watched some clips on YouTube because it was her, Benjamin Bratt. And it's like you watch some of the clips, it's like it wasn't a terrible film. Like when after it was released, it was like regarded as the worst comic book movie ever made. Even though you have Howard the Duck, Supergirl, and George Clooney's Batman and Robin, which really wasn't that terrible, but in Clooney's eyes, he almost killed the franchise. And the deal with Catwoman was Catwoman originally was to be a spinoff starring Michelle Pfeiffer off of Batman Returns, and Tim Burton was going to direct it. But then some things happened with Tim Burton and DC, and that project shelved for years until Halle Berry took over. The crazy thing about Tim Burton is that DC took two more films away from three, really. I think he probably would have had another Batman film. I think he probably would have had a trilogy. DC took away a Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman movie, and most importantly, DC took away the Superman movie with Nicolas Cage that Tim Burton was going to direct. So, man, DC, man, what the hell? So when it comes to Catwoman, I was looking, it's like, well, do people still think Catwoman is still one of the worst movies ever made? Rotten Tomatoes is the fourth ranked worst comic book movie ever. But IMDb is number 12, I think. It's ahead of Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern and right behind Superman versus Batman, the Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill film, which it should have been a slam dunk. Like, Cavill was a good Superman, and Affleck was a really underrated Batman. They should have made the old man Batman film, but they pivoted to the Robert Pattinson young Batman film. But they should have I still think they should do an older Batman flick. There's so many different universes you can do it. But Zack Snyder, the big difference between Zack Snyder and Christopher Nolan is that Zack Snyder is more style and little story. Like, he'll write the story, but it's more style with him. I hate the special effects that he uses. Chris Nolan is totally different. He uses some green screen stuff, but for the most part, it's more story driven. And that's where he is. It's story driven and research driven. And the thing about Catwoman, Catwoman was a cautionary tale, because I hate directors or writers who might not understand the comic book world that they're entering. They'll just say, well, I'll give it a shot. I'll do this. It's the same thing with Kathleen Kennedy over with Lucasfilms. Like, The Acolyte was a disaster. And it's amazing when you look at The Acolyte, because there's so much source material for Star Wars that all these projects that she's putting out that's been trash, except for Rogue One and The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2. Like, there's so much source material for Star Wars. These things shouldn't be happening, but they are. And I think the same thing's happened to Catwoman and many other films, is that you hire people that says, like, they're almost proud by the fact, well, I don't read comic books, so I don't, we're just gonna have a new take on it. It's like, there's no new take. Like, Matt Reeves came off Planet of the Apes. Before he did the Batman, he did Planet of the Apes. And he said that he was a fan, not only was he a fan of Batman, but when he did the research, he did a deep dive, and he used some of the storyline from Batman Year One and The Long Halloween as the basis for the Batman. That's what you're supposed to do. You take someone like the Russo Brothers, right? The Russo Brothers, if you look at their filmography, they had nothing to do with action movies, comic book movies. At least Matt Reeves had Cloverfield and Planet of the Apes. The Russo Brothers didn't have that. They did Welcome to Collinwood. I think George Clooney produced that. Ron Howard liked them, and they were the initial directors for Arrested Development, and it was part of that series. And then they were part of the series of Community. So there was nothing that says Marvel with the Russo Brothers, but they were great storytellers. You give me a director who's a great storyteller, and I think you'll have a fantastic film. If you just give me a stylized director who's going for quick cuts and make it look cool, and it's like we're going to reimagine the origin story, it's like, no, because you still got a whole comic book audience that you needed to feed. And I feel bad for Halle Berry, because I think given the hands of another director, I think the Catwoman would have been a really good movie. But I would like to ask Halle Berry, because Halle Berry is one of those rare actors that she's worked in Marvel and DC, like along with Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Reynolds did Marvel and DC. He had Green Lantern. He has Deadpool. And when I look at Halle Berry, to be honest, if I had to compare her two performances with Storm, with the X-Men movies, and with Catwoman, I think she was a better Catwoman than she was as Storm. Like, I never bought Halle Berry as Storm. Like, I'm an old fan of the X-Men comic books. I started with the whole Jean Grey, Dark Phoenix storyline. So that's where I started at. So Storm was Storm in the comics was always like an African princess, like an African queen type. So when we get to Halle Berry, I was kind of like, I don't see her in that role. Like, if we go back to 2004, like an actress that probably could have pulled it off would have been Angela Bassett, but Angela Bassett's short. Like, Halle Berry's like 5'5", and Angela Bassett's like 5'4", so she would have been a short Storm. But if you go by who looked the part back then, but wasn't a great actress, was probably Tyra Banks. When I look at Tyra Banks back then in 2004, she would have been an excellent Storm, but the acting chops wasn't there. You know, like Rebecca Romijn, I mean, she was a model, and she was great as Rue, but she didn't need to have a whole lot of dialogue for Rue, so she was great in that role. So Tyra Banks kind of fits what Storm was. I just never saw Halle Berry in a role. In fact, I think they initially wanted Janet Jackson for that role, and Janet is actually a better actress. I won't say she's a better actress than Halle. I think she would have fit well in that role, but she was busy. So, what do you guys think? What do you think is the worst comic book movie ever made? Is it Catwoman? I don't think it's Catwoman. I think Howard the Duck still leads the way. I think Howard the Duck was great in premise. They just didn't know how to do it back then because that was the 80s. I think Supergirl was pretty bad. And to be honest, the films that really disappointed me the most was DC's Zack Snyder run. Because you have Henry Cavill. Like, Henry Cavill was a really good Superman. Ben Affleck was a really good Batman. You had Gal Gadot as Superwoman, and you had Jason Momoa as Aquaman. They had the actors. And when you look at most comic book movies, all of them, for the most part, has really good actors. But it's always the story. Like, when I was looking at the list of films that did terrible, like a lot of people didn't like the Fantastic Four films. Like, even though the source material is rich with Doctor Doom and all that stuff, and Reed Richards and Sue Richards and the Human Torch and Ben Grimm, the Thing, the Fantastic Four film should be a slam dunk, but they always seem to get it wrong. I don't know what these directors are thinking. So if you're head of any studio, TV studio, movie studio, and you want to do a comic book film, find a director who has a great vision, that he's proven that when he or she directs films, it's a great flow to it and it looks really good. However, make sure this person is also good with storytelling. And make sure this person always, and if they're not a fan of comic books or whatever, make sure they're good at researching. Like Nolan, the reason Oppenheimer worked so well, even though some people found it boring, but the reason it worked so well is this dude does his research. I'm sure he didn't know much about the atom bomb, and he probably knew a few things about the bomb and a few things about Oppenheimer, but he did a full deep dive on that before he even put that film out. Like, he researched, whoever him and his staff is, they do a great job of putting these things together. Like, even now, like, when I think about, could they do Catwoman again, I think about what happened to Harley Quinn. Like, Harley Quinn, Margot Robbie put out the Harley Quinn movie, and it just wasn't as good. Like, sometimes you can't take these other characters. They might fit in, like, Harley Quinn might fit in Suicide Squad, but I don't know, whatever they did with the spinoff just wasn't as good. And it's just almost like a waste of her talent, because they tried to change too many things. So who do you think is the best Catwoman? I think if I was ranking it on film, I think Miss Michelle Pfeiffer, #1. And then there's a divide, because Michelle Pfeiffer is great. And I think Zoe Kravitz was actually good in the Batman as Catwoman. So I kind of go, her and Halle's about the same. So I'll give them the ice. I put Halle in #2. I put Zoe in #3. And then I put Anne Hathaway in #4. Not to say Anne Hathaway did a bad job, because I actually enjoyed her Catwoman in The Dark Knight Rising. But on this list, she's #4. And Michelle Pfeiffer is #1. So what do you think is the worst comic book movie ever made? Is it Catwoman? I don't think so. Like the Green Lantern is pretty bad. And and thank God for Deadpool's, because even though Ryan Reynolds has that on his resume, he has Deadpool to counteract that. So what do you think is the worst movie ever made? And also, give me your favorite Halle Berry movie to commemorate this lovely photo here.